I already know.
First time to the two.
I was overwhelmed with this part.
Welcome everybody to our North Main Street Task Force. I am Councilwoman Sue Andergwa. It is Wednesday, June 25th at 5:33. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I think we're just going to please take the roll.
Chair Sue Anderson,
I am here.
Vice Chair Jamie Avigian,
Here.
Lieutenant William Brown,
Here.
Marissa Lopes, absent. Rachel Peterson,
I'm here.
Peter Cameron,
Here.
Thomas Badway, absent. Sarah Engel,
Here.
Jessica Lance,
Here.
Nate Urso.
Here.
Sean Raymond,
Here.
and Rosie Jaswal.
Here.
You have 10 present, 2 absent, you have a quorum.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm excited for us to be back. It's been 2 months since we've seen each other, so we need some time. So thank you for your patience. This room has been mainly used for the budget for the last 2 months, so it tends to not talk about budget here in the street. I wanted to give a few quick updates on some things that have happened, some progress since the last meeting before we dive in on the official agenda items of progress since the last meeting. So I'm just going to share a few things, and then others have things they want to add. Oh, before that, I also want to acknowledge, thank you to the clerks for being here, Claire and Kyla, thank you, and also our solicitor's office. Being here is always very Felix. And everybody who's here. The other thing that I always forget to say is that there is a sign-in sheet. We always do public comment at the end, but we do ask for you to sign in. The sign-in sheet is on that table under the television. And so if you'd like to make public comment, please sign in. Please sign in. I would say again in the middle of the evening. If you don't sign in, I will not help. The 3 things I was going to share that happened since our last meeting that are exciting. One was a big high five to Sarah and Zach as follow-up from our conversation we had with Miriam Hospital about the work that they're doing. It's not about working, but they're focused on the other side of this meeting. They have now signed on to the Ripley's Way to Work program. We had a nice public handshake on it a few weeks ago, or 1 week ago. Last week, very recently, very hot. I remember that. So thank you to Sarah and Zach. They're starting to pilot, I think, 200 employees, hoping to go from there.
We're getting calls from other than the 200. We're like, we need to sign up. So
Yeah,
hopefully soon.
so it's really exciting.
Beautiful.
And so that came directly out of the conversation we had at this meeting. So thank you all so much for that. I forget who said that was, but there's someone here. The other 2 other quick things. One is big congrats. There was ribbon cutting for the oh my gosh, the guitar, what's his name? The guitar business leader. Empire Guitar. Something was second that was not that. Empire Guitar just opened a beautiful, wonderful new facility on North Main and 10. It's really great for that part of the neighborhood. Please go check it out if you are at all a guitar player or keyboard or anything music related. It's awesome. It's great to see that they've made a huge investment in their business on North Main, and while you're out there, you're getting sandwich at the same time. So so that's a little chat. But it's really nice to see that kind of development happening on North Main. And we're going to talk a little bit about some new lighting that's in the area in just a second. And the last thing I wanted to update on was since our last meeting, but right after our last meeting, the Department of Housing at the state level had put out a request for information on the idea of there was a bond a few years ago around incentivizing housing development across the state. It included some call out some specific funding for public developer for like development that the state itself could be doing. And they put out a request for information on like where should we be investing? And obviously we were like obviously North Main Street. So Council President Miller and I put in this letter to the Secretary of Housing, Deborah Goddard, in mid-April, asking for just sharing some information about public housing. We also there's a whole survey we had to fill out, which we did not print out copies of because it was like an online survey. So obviously did not put that out for you guys, but did print out the letter that Council President Miller and I sent together, asking for that kind of investment to be happening. So more follow-up to come. This is just part of the process. But I wanted to share that we did that and, are always trying to hustle today, but just pay attention to the opportunities on the way.
Yeah, Trisha, can I say something? I helped Brandon with that survey and I did my best to put as much amazing things on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It's like a last minute Friday thing, I was like, let's go.
Yeah, it was very short notice for the, request for information, so we really hustled to get it in with Trisha. And also Brandon on our policy team who's not here, but, stopped by a second. Put it on. So those were my, quick updates since the last meeting, so some good progress. So if anyone else has anything they want to share that's not otherwise on the agenda. Okay, yep, decide upon it and do it. Do your thing. Cool, well then I'm gonna, ask for the, agenda item 2 to please be read into the record, and we're gonna get an update from our fantastic. Oh, wait, I always forget. Thank you. What would I do that? We have to enter this as an exhibit, because I just can't figure it out. Can someone make a motion to enter this as an exhibit one, please? Excellent, then second.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, excellent. Okay, thank you, Claire.
You're welcome.
And, awesome. Can you read item 2 to the agenda?
Item number 2 is updates on lighting projects, presentation by Kyle Delgado, Director of Project Management.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle.
Hey, good evening, everybody. It's been a while, so welcome back. I didn't say bye, please. What you have in front of you, in front of your packet is what said the North Main Street corridor lighting and streetscape improvements internal memo, which I apologize, that's obviously not what we're facing here. But I wanted to summarize a lot of the activity that we've done in the last couple of months and with some of these meetings. So with our lighting project, you see for the item 1, we have installed 35 new LED for the overhead street lights on the northbound and southbound sides of North Main Street. I listed all of the exact street poles too, so if you guys want to go out there and actually visually go inspect them and see their impact, we would really welcome that feedback. A majority of them have been electrified, but we are still waiting on a couple of them to get some energy from, we're out of energy. So 35 there, the northbound side is largely north of the burial ground, down towards the Pawtucket line, but there are some scattered throughout, from the all over north. And then southbound is largely on that burial ground side, going down the stretch of the burial ground, with some scattered elsewhere. So again, largely most of them are energized. They have mast arms, but LED fixtures. And they have been integrated into the city's GIS and SLV systems, so now we can track the assets, frankly, once they go along, that we can respond to any maintenance efforts and get those done. So again, we're requesting that task force members are out there, even time at nighttime, just assess, the lights that we have out there, and feel free to give us feedback. Hopefully, we will respond to the areas that the presentation had noted as, impactful intersections of the RSA. So I've welcomed feedback on those. Along with improving lighting and installing, we've done a little bit of tree trimming efforts along the corridor that had been some trees that were a little bit overgrown, incorporating some lights and getting some illumination. So we coordinated with our city forester to cover the areas that are in the city jurisdiction, which is the Oil Ave South, largely median area. We've also initiated a request with RIDOT, and thank you, Sean, to get some things going for and the RIDOT zones as well. So that'll be coming up in the next few weeks as well, to help kind of with some lights that have been deferred by overgrown trees. The second more impactful phase, well, I'm not gonna say more impactful, but the second phase of this is the University Marketplace area where we are doing decorative lighting. So our engineering plans are now complete. We have kind of the area that we want to touch over there. The main thing is that RI Energy determined that there are no underground secondary service lines that exist in the area. So we may have to have a new primary service connection via transformer. So it's going through an evaluation phase right now. A survey is going to be scheduled for Tuesday, July 1. That will determine the exact spot for your time location. And then from there, we can, take the next steps on doing the excavations and doing all the like to make sure that the infrastructure is there to set up the power for the lights. You know, a lot of the materials have been, received, including the concrete bases, the poles, all the lighting fixtures. So really, the main thing that is the deliverable that we're depending on is just the survey of the lights. And then being able to have the main line connection. So that'll be happening over the next few weeks. It's been a little bit of a lag, really getting that, you know, when we found out there was no primary service connection area, so we haven't kind of navigate that. But we're still moving forward and we still like to have that done this. So the, main thing I wanted to, you know, highlight as well is that, you know, we had a $500,000 budget. You can kind of see in the third piece, it's a budget snapshot of approximate, you know, there's some invoices that we've already paid for, and then some approximate estimates for some of the work, you know, dirty decorative lighting poles, the laser, the excavation, and all the like. These are approximate numbers, things that might fluctuate. We are buying a little bit more poles on the southbound side of the burial ground as well. So if the prices are a little bit higher, we can see some of this dwindle. The main risk, like the rest of this budget here, is that like if we are going to need that transformer in that area, then that's significant. Right, not all of it's 42,000 left there. So this is kind of approximate, but for the most part, we, you know, encumbered and spent down or, you know, budgeted for most of that $500,000 there. And then, you know, towards the bottom is a summary of some project wins. There were some internal discussions about some poles that were problematic in the sense that we may have to power lines across the street, and, you know, that would have, you know, deeply affected our project budgets as well. So we decided to omit some of those, like pole 148 and 150, but we still were able to keep them in a design with RIDOT around energy, so that if we were to kind of improve it later on, we can solve the flexibility to use it later. You know, no trenching or unsightly wire crossings would be that at the moment, so that's really good. And again, our budget has been controlled up to so far. You know, our biggest risk being that that transformer is needed and the light poles south are more than expected. Besides that, I mean, cross agency alignment, right? That has been a great partner. Again, thank you, Sean. It's been very responsive and helpful around energy, and Prism had, you know, had consistent communications, as well as I say stakeholders such as BPW, who has helped streamline some permitting processing for us. So it's been fairly smooth getting things moving along here. So I'm very appreciative of all the stakeholders that have the table that made this complex kind of bureaucracy very easy for us. So yeah, we are continuing, and I expect the decorative lighting kind of last portion of this significantly to be complete by the end of this summer. And with that, we will have the pedestrian level with the decorative lights that I think will have a nice safety feature. The pedestrian level also has a nice aesthetic charm, you know, for that area as well. So definitely looking forward to that. And
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. I'm gonna add 3 quick things more for context. One is since Kyle is the best person on the planet, so thank you, Kyle. That's for the context. He's really really navigating all this bureaucracy along Brian Prism, so Kyle is amazing. And then just as a reminder, since it's been a minute since we had, you know, lighting was brought up as one of the main. We had a really great presentation on lighting, but as one of the factors that is involved in the safety of practice. So both from like a safety perspective, but also just like creating a better ambiance and like life on North Main Street, particularly in the business district, both by the Whole Foods and also North, where like the Sandwich Hut and Fire Star and others are, making sure that those are well lit, people can get around. For us. So they was also highlighted as something that we could immediately do because we could wait for the stiff already was longer term processes. So it's something we wanted to do as fast as we could. And we were able to shade use that $500,000 that really helped us like this. So just wanted to provide that reminder of why we're doing this, where it came from, and his gratitude to Kyle and the team for moving this, so quickly and like keeping up with all the processes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If I can, I just want to give a final thank you to like all of our stakeholders there. Like it's really complex dealing with, you know, pole ownership, who owns what pole, the city owns some poles. Rather than owns some poles, right? I had jurisdiction over, you know, a portion of the street, and the city had, like, everybody has been willing and able to help us and get this thing. So, you know, I really do want to thank everybody for being so willing to come to this.
and even like the city forester has been just right at the table, you were hearing that some of the lighting was dim because of the trees, and like obviously keep the trees and everything else, we also wanted to be cooler, if you just jump right in, that's what those were. Rosie, did you have a question or comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, some new pictures and things are going up. I'm wondering if there's been updates or progress on like the existing ones that weren't working.
Yeah, I think those have been part of the conversation with prison, right? Like,
Yeah, I haven't been as actively working those with them, the newer ones, but I can certainly circle back with Brian and see, you know, there were work orders that were put in and requests to have those energized. I'll be honest, I haven't kept up with that. And it's trying to follow.
I remember Brian did the ones that prison could do, but I don't think they could hang out on those that were like AC. Also, as a note, the AC is quite loud, so everybody needs to fix their active voice, or you will get heard. But
Very thankful for this.
yeah, we don't want to turn it off. Also, you need to use like a weird stick to turn it off, but like, we're definitely not doing that. It's really complicated, but just use your active voice.
Rosie, were there specific poles that you were thinking of? There are a couple by the old Main Street intersection that last I checked weren't on, but that was a while ago, so I'm not sure.
So,
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions for Kyle? Thank you, Kyle. You're doing awesome, and it's all partners, but. Awesome. Okay, so moving right along, so much has been going on since we were on that. The number 3, we have number 3. Oh, wait, what did I do? Oh, so we. Can someone, please, go ahead, a motion to enter this exhibit 2?
Seconded.
Excellent, all in favor? Okay, excellent, okay, who's now exhibit 2? We had a couple things come in pretty right. Okay, so. Could you please read item 3 into the record?
Item number 3, update on safety measures for the intersection of North Main, Benefit, and Olney Street. Presentation by Nate Urso, traffic engineer.
Awesome. Before you start, Nate, and we enter this presentation and exhibit 3.
I'll make a motion to enter exhibit 3.
Excellent, all in favor?
Okay.
Excellent, thank you all. Nate, take it away.
Are we able to, hold up the presentation?
Yes.
Because there is a video.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, yeah, so, since our last meeting, there has been some progress on, okay. On the improvements to basically realign the Benefit Street approach to Elgin Street. In essence, removing the free right turn that, leads to a lot of speeding in that right turn and the detriment to pedestrian safety for pedestrians that are crossing the crosswalk on Elgin Street. We did do a, in the end of May, we did do a temporary alignment of that new layout, basically to see how the traffic operated. And the concern was when you take away that free right and also, what that also does, it also requires Benefit Street traffic to stop and actually merge into one of the travel lanes on North Main Street. So the concern was, how would that operate? Would there be any backup on Benefit Street and also on North Main Street also? The state have such a free right going up onto the street. So we did lay out the new alignment. Basically bringing in Benefit Street kind of to a T into North Main Street. Requiring them to stop, we put up temporary stop sign and also do enter signs on the opposite side facing the North Main Street traffic, and the stop signs facing the Benefit Street traffic. And we did observe during some peak traffic periods, the morning peak, on Friday morning on the 30th, and also on the evening peak, 4:30 and 6 on the 29th, which is a Thursday. So, during the AM peak, the backup and the congestion was quite a bit less than the PM peak. About 1 to 3 vehicles with queue observed on Benefit Street waiting to get into the stream of traffic on North Main Street, and on North Main Street between 2 to 17 vehicles queued during that time period. All the vehicles did clear, the ones on Benefit Street and North Main Street, during the green phase of North Main Street and LD Street. So, they did clear that. And some of those queues on North Main Street existed similar without this taking away the free right North Main Street on North Main Street. During the PM peak, there was observed 1 to 3 vehicles were queued on Benefit Street waiting to get into North Main Street. About 7 to 8 vehicles were observed queued on North Main Street. All the vehicles did clear the queue during that green cycle phase on North Main Street, except there was one instance where the vehicles on North Main Street didn't get through the queue. So that was one instance out of that whole hour and a half there, so it wasn't anywhere near typical. So I think we can conclude that this alignment really does not cause any significant traffic congestion. It does improve pedestrian safety. So that is removed, and labels. It's a little video of basically that operation. This is looking down Benefit Street. You can see the codes there shifted traffic over onto Benefit Street.
It won't play, this cannot play media.
You'll have to imagine, so. Yeah, it basically shows there's some queuing on Benefit Street and North Main Street, but it does clear once that green phase goes through North Main Street and Main Street. Yeah, so excuse the lack of CAD skills here. This is basic.
Quick question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the traffic volume, like how many cars and like it's like. Right, is that a queue count here? Is that a car that come on Benefit Street? I guess.
Yeah, yeah, we actually,
Also, volume.
I don't know what. You can probably have some counts on Benefit and what they, we were just kind of concerned about. The congestion, was there significant delay? But it was certainly more traffic than what they Benefit. I don't know what the number was, but
Okay.
it's basically, it's basically an observation. The other option we're doing is traffic test or studies to model it. I think this would actually give you better results of trying to model this in the computer when you take away your free right. Unless you get, it's an unsignalized intersection, some of the modeling, software modeling is a little less accurate. So that's what we did this actually. The concept we have to.
Also, shout out to the like 10 people who texted me as soon as they saw them scores go up. So yeah, they're very excited. People have eyes on them. Yeah, I'm not constantly how many people notice this happening and we're excited about it, but it's captured in my text.
So, excuse the, listen. Stellar. Like, iterative drafting capacity, like, just the lack, but this is basically the layout. Given to the striping contractor, I think. From the last time we showed the concept, the only real change there is we wanted to test this. With that test, we actually, instead of only giving, if you look at on Burris Lane, on the east side of North Main Street, there's existing 2 parking spaces there from that office building. I think under the original concept, it was sort of just giving them 1 space. But I did speak with them and I did offer them 2 spaces, and we want, by doing that, you're basically just pushing up the Benefit Street entrance a little further north. And the concern was, how would that, wasn't any delays on Benefit Street, because they would be further into the queue on North Main Street. But from the results we just showed, it did.
Is that second vehicle gonna be able to maneuver in and out? of
Yeah.
the spot?
Yeah, we actually, when I laid this out with the striping contractor, it's actually gonna be, was a 10-foot little cutout where they can actually move around to the space there. So it's not as abrupt as that, as the striping shows there, so, instead of going right into the final space there at the end, it'll actually be jutting out, you know, the ability to turn in and turn out. Into the queue. So that's roughly what is being proposed for the striping. That should be done in the next, possibly Thursday, if not early next week. So as said, in the next week, probably 2 weeks at the most, the paving markings will be done there. We'll be turning in some type of temporary stop and do enter signs. There'll be something that will be more substantial than a telephone with a weighted base or base. You can have some temporary signs there that will actually be bolted into the pavement. And soon after the striping is done, we're going to be putting in flex posts. And there is some ongoing conversations and coordination of actually between planners for that. I think we could still put the flex posts in, and the planners could be positioned within the flex post there. I don't think that's the flex post will prevent any plan for installation there. Yes.
So I noticed there wasn't kind of a little bike lane cutout kind of incorporated like along the curb. So with the intent that the bikes are supposed to go around the curb extension and then get back in on only, or are we gonna leave a gap in the barriers so that bikes can use that area?
Yeah, we could do that in terms of extensions. I think there is hopefully some type of long-term project that we talked last time about having a crossing at Benefit Street to require some wheelchair ramps. So, and possibly instead of, the striping is actually putting some curving. Yeah.
What's the timing of the flex posts?
They're in stock, it's not about the 20 minutes, we'll install those soon after.
Rachel, were you about to talk about something?
Yes, it was, and Nate was trying to get into it too. Where do pedestrians cross?
That is, a crosswalk across Benefit Street is something that's not. If you put a crosswalk in there, you're gonna have to put something with this, and that's gonna be incorporated into the final.
So there's no crosswalk initially.
Right.
And then one will be put in where the blue is?
No, it's not shown on this. Something that's gonna be done. There's some opportunities. For. I mean, and it can be done in parts. I mean, the crosswalk can be done in a wheelchair ramp, put in without, in an earlier phase, without having to put curbing in for the whole bump out with the stripe.
I see what you're saying, so right now you want to just get flexibles and sign.
Yeah, to see if you can get out.
If you do a crosswalk, you're probably.
Right, you're gonna have to put some big circuits.
That could come
So
next.
it's like, it's paid for now, and then eventually it's actually building back up. That.
Yeah, I mean, the crosswalk is something that can be, that's not a lot for me, yes. But there is a possibility for a long-term project, for all the striping would be, with the bump out, where it's striped right now, can be actually curved.
Is that a change?
Yeah, I mean, the crosswalk can be something that can be done. That, there won't be any concern costs about it, there's funding to do that. Striking crosswalk is pretty much. There's funding to do that, so that'll be done as soon as we can get it, sure.
But I think like where the crosswalk goes and how it's angled matters a lot too.
Yeah, so that's, I think we can have some crossing. But, you're right, how it actually is angled there. It's not gonna be where the stop bar is. It's gonna have to be some type of, mid block crossing. Until the final, until that's actually occurred.
So
With
something-
the striping is. So it'll probably be somewhere around where we're speaking.
Which was the crosswalk there now? Yeah,
I
right.
mean, ideally, you'd like to have some type of crosswalk where the stop bar is, but that won't happen until you actually have some permit for me.
I mean, I do walk this most days.
Yeah.
I'm like, is there a crosswalk?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like,
Yes, but
and I think a lot of people do the same route, which is you're walking on North Main, not coming from Benefit, so it's like you don't wanna swing back to Benefit to cross, you know what I'm saying, because you're already at that angle kind of,
Oh, yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
But I think what Nate's saying is, and I see your point, this is a good start. And there'll be plenty of room to walk in between the post for that. And, yeah.
This won't be less ADA compliant.
Yeah.
No,
It's not, it's not anything.
You'll just have
It
a
already
smaller
doesn't make sense.
area to physically have to cross the roadway, so it should be inherently safer. You know, it's not that reasonable.
Yeah. So, yeah,
I share the frustration of not being able to do.
everything's.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of crosswalks in the city that are pending some of the change of this thing, we're working with the engineering division to find some funding to do that. And there's sidewalk funds like that. So it's not, that's probably something that can. We are looking at some projects. There's a sidewalk project benefits we incorporate into the permanent measures that was actually curbing this realignment. That is an extra funded. But something about the crosswalk is something that. Fun. If we go to it.
Yeah, on the flex boats, so it sounds like you're doing this, like the skinny flex boats, right?
Yeah, sorry, I looked at what you suggested, I did order some different type of flex posts there. I looked at, a few manufacturers, looked at ones that has testing done that actually put the most rigid flex posts that endure certain, crash testing that we did, pick one that was the sturdiest.
Okay, so it's a step up.
Yeah, it's different than a bunch of other ones. So, it is white, but it's not bigger.
Yeah, so maybe it's even all.
I think the only reason they would have to come out is you'd have to plow it. I mean, the only reason you think about it on these streets, it's not right. You don't have a wide enough plow it, little bike lane, but if we're able to plow this, get in and plow this area, maybe we can just take out a couple. Because
I see like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's just a striped area, yeah.
or,
Really
um, but, you know, we look at the ones on Home Street, those last.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, when you get bigger storms. Being able to put the snow in a certain place, it actually also. It's just a concern that the flexible structure, that has to snow. So, I think that's too deep. I think you may look at what happened. Look through, we got them in and just. Leave it.
Yes, this might be a Sean plus you question, but I think part of the RSA recommendations was a no right turn on red for that right turn movement as well. Is that gonna be incorporated into
Yeah.
this?
We were just talking about that. I thought there was one there before. We actually brought it up on Google. It used to
coming down from the pony.
oh, that was down.
I was going down.
Yeah, and then that one's really faded too. Like the
Is
one-
Is that still being reviewed by it?
So we would have to bring it to state track, which it's good times, I think, doing some other stuff at the same time.
Do you need like a request for that or?
It helps to have something from the city, otherwise. It's stronger.
Not for this.
So that might be-
it's only short.
That would help.
You mean- Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no sign there that says.
Right, yeah.
We do all.
So you do it all together. That makes sense. I'll follow. Nate, do you have more you wanted to talk through, or else I also wanted to ask, Dylan, if you could talk a little bit about the PowerPoint you created, but maybe you don't for PowerPoint.
No, I think that's what I'm assuming.
No, Dylan, can you say your name for the record?
My name is Dylan Giles, and I'm Providence. I don't know if this was distributed to.
Oh, and can I have a motion for this exhibit 4, please?
Make the motion.
Thank you, Jack. Second.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, all in favor? Yeah, okay.
So just for context, we did, I think, at the last meeting, we discussed that it was Kids Coalition was going forward to providing grants for beautification paintings around Providence, and we wanted to use the grant for traffic safety, traffic calming, for traffic lands. So we did get that grant, and it was just putting some options kind of on the table and trying to give this by any means an exhaustive list of possible products that we can use here. Starting with what is one of the heavier concrete options, certainly approaches, but similar to what they have on the transactions for the bucket. These are on the medians and on the sidewalks. They do a really nice job there. Quite heavy, 1,800 pounds. And the second option was rhino guards, protective planter. These are quite expensive, so you know the grant we received is not large. It's like $3,000. So only the couple of these, but obviously and they're using on these. They're obviously hoping to do these here, but other places. Intersections. The one I really liked was this third option, the Cybertech self-water reservoir filter. This is actually a composite plastic. And you know, I like the durability of the concrete, certainly, you know, there's safety ones, but I saw these all over the consumer there. They use some daylighting, they use crosswalks, they use some extensions as well. And they're we could get much more for them. About $3,000. The grant also covers plantings itself, so we also need to purchase plants and pay seconds to volunteers to maintain it. So we'd love some feedback if you have any now or later in this region's kind of impact. But as you can see on the second page, you know, unfilled Cybertech is about 54 pounds, unfilled about 300. So it would be more manageable for us, small nonprofits, to get out there. Certainly, we would, you know, love and support the city if possible. If we wanted to go with that heavy option, you know, Working with engineering to determine what the most advantageous spot are. And then the last two are just a couple of like options. I just threw them in, they're like, okay, options that came our way when we got this grant. The Mass Protector River Watershed Council were like, hey, we have our own self-water instances. We like build them ourselves. They have a good engineer. And so that's what this DIY one is. You know, some of the platforms they have, and then more than 3 residents between them. Sent us. Sent us our own, the current some members. So, but yeah, we're really excited.
No. That's good.
This bit is moving super quickly, you know, I think we will. I don't know if you can put bulbs in the above ground winter or to come up in the spring, that would be awesome. The timing of this grant is challenging because it's, we find out in March, it's a hunting grant, so you have to extend maybe spring to action. And so it's something like this that has to go through a bunch of different processes. But open to any feedback. And also plant ideas, if we ever get it.
Yeah.
Um,
Awesome. Any questions? Yes, Sarah.
Are there I may have missed this, but locations for these?
So the most obvious location is this intersection where the urban extensions are happening now. You know, there are certainly plenty of other possibilities on North Main Street. We really don't have any examples of like physical objects being used for daylighting, for traffic calming in the city, other than the Hope Street examples earlier. And so we'd love this to be a pilot. We have plenty of volunteers who are really hard at the job during this and see how they work. I think the intersection with the oil right from Jerry's is quite a wide one. Potentially extended. And then I was also thinking like the ambulance turn the RSA recommended closing, but that one was really bad. That's where one died. And the fire department thinks it needs it. I think they said that they don't need it. So there's residents having off that. It's quite dangerous for pedestrians who aren't expecting to see it. That's an obvious one as well. So yeah, to be.
And I make one quick recommendation for planting, depending on when you get this in. So this seems like it would be a really fun opportunity to sort of put a call out to the community to volunteer plants that they might have if they want to like transplant or like move some stuff from their gardens to bring stuff in, just as a way to like get ahead of the season and to get it done quickly. And then I feel like this could be a thing like that could become annual as a way to like get the community involved with the maintenance and like feel ownership over it. So just an idea for.
We have so many people who are like, I will like please like tell me to come water, tell me to come clean. I think this can definitely be community initiative.
Yeah, I've worked with quite a few communities that use these self-watering, the plastic ones. They're really great. Yeah, in terms of like worrying about them getting hit or anything like that, I feel like this application at this intersection, at least, like folks should be going pretty slow around that corner. And that's kind of the intent of those curb extensions. So if they're just set back a little bit and we have the flex posts that are actually doing the delineation, I think this would be a great place for this style of planting for sure.
Yeah, if you're in Burlington, check them out. But they got them in the gray style and they look like concrete. It took me a couple of days to figure out they were not concrete. So they're going to be perceived, if we get the gray ones, you know, to perceive and then just right apart.
They are substantial. So,
Yeah.
They hold their own for sure. I guess I wonder if there is any opportunity, just like these photos, to kind of incorporate some color and some like paint within the stripes of the curb extension as well. Like obviously be a separate effort, but could be another opportunity to
Like the color.
liven things up. Yeah. Or I
This
think
picture of Memphis is like exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
With the intersection of Lee Street. I got it.
I'm gonna be in, I just wanted everybody to know that I'm gonna be in Burlington in like 2 weeks, so I'll definitely look for it.
Thanks, take a look at this work. This is maybe more of a suggestion for a future conversation. But I kind of wanted to just pause for a second. There's a big difference between planters that we could be done, and planters that we could down, that's obviously in terms of, like, is it a deterrent to drive space or become a stop car? And I'll, defer to the professionals with expertise here. This could be a spot, but it may be good for us to have a conversation at some point about like the larger strategy of the roadway in terms of like, are there spots where we want to create like a physical barrier catch that we give half of the calories that from pressure about a year ago. So again, that's a different spot. But I want to be thinking about those starting spots too, and in terms of like places that we should be targeting. And again, that's a bigger conversation. So that's
That might start coming from the update on the STIP process, which we discussed about conversation.
I'll note the second option, this brand has this term hostile vehicle mitigation system. So their planters and their seats and their furniture is also super heavy, and it's crash tested, but not crash tested, so it'll break away and the car will survive. It's crash tested, so you can stop it from passing through your policy. So I share your concern. Part of the reason I like the lightweight is because we are like an organization right now, like we don't have forklifts, we don't have, but I share that concern.
And you guys follow maybe Kyle, it could be in like this team and putting could get together and think about the next steps in case there's a location for that, like if it's the budget, if that is a budget to do the handicap parking, then they not parking, sorry, handicap sidewalk, and then they're looking for the but if there's, yeah, maybe we just follow up in the next couple of weeks, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely good.
Yes.
You want to text people who don't know what they want, but you also don't want to be rational. So it's a case by case basis. Yeah, it depends, it depends on the location. That's snagging in, runs off the road, a woman stop. Instantly, and that brings a more serious accident.
Cool, yeah, let's follow up. We can do that.
Sure.
And that's a really like idea of the good thing. I know like we're in the whole side, it's a really active biology group. You don't always just say, yeah.
That's exactly what I was
You don't always
thinking.
post the plans they're trying to get rid of, like cutting, all sorts of stuff, so that could be a really.
I need to thin my irises.
Yeah,
Please
we
take
have
that.
that North Main Street and then like you could do, yeah. Possibly. Yeah, so many constant. Makes sense. Yeah, Sharon knows. Thank you, Dylan, that's awesome. Any other questions for Dylan? I lost my agenda, it's just on there, and we already took that meeting.
The plan was right here, I'm pretty sure.
Uh,
I've always seen there.
Do we need to read items for the agenda?
Item number 4, Bristol Metro Connector update, presentation by Sarah Engel and Zach Agush. Agish, I'm sorry, I apologize. Dash Richter.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then we enter their presentation as exhibit 5, please.
So moved.
Maybe 1 second. Thank you. All in favor? Okay. Sarah and Zach, thank you so much for providing the update. Zach,
our
we really
pleasure.
to the table.
Yeah, and well, I think, Nate, can you pass over the clicker? All right,
Zach, do you want this seat? I'll scoot.
If you don't want.
No, not at all. I'll take my smoothie and sit over your words.
yeah, and I am just gonna hand it over to Zach, but I do want to note that the handouts are missing every other page, so.
So you're gonna be surprised about half the presentation.
So
But it's all green.
it's right here. He sent it this morning with all the, it was in the photo. Oh, they did, I showed the side. Oh, what is that? Oh, okay.
I'll make sure.
Well, we'll find out in a
They
second.
never print out on the side, their side.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there it is. No, oh, they don't mind.
Are we, can we start? Or-
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Evening, everyone. Thank you, Councilwoman and your boss for allowing us to give an update on the project. For those of you who do not know who I am Zachary Irish, principal planner for capital development at the Public Transit Authority. I've been with the authority for 6.5 years, and the better part of the last year, I've really been spending a lot of my time on this project. I think what we're hearing from you tonight really marks a major milestone for the effort. But before I move to the next slide, the Metro Connector study is a alternatives analysis looking at the prospects of high capacity transit within the metropolitan area, running from Central Falls in north down to Warwick, and really trying to provide a competitive and far more reliable service throughout the area. And so, there it is. So our intent is to provide the best competitive service against automotive travel, and really connect our business districts, our neighborhoods, our activity centers, while supporting many of the state's major goals, whether that's climate, housing, health, economic development. So, and with that in mind, you know, there are 5 kind of primary aspects of this project that all kind of align. And so, you know, as a transit authority, our first major priority is to go transit ridership. And that comes with the increase in frequency level we're trying to achieve. Enhancing connectivity throughout the region. One of the big pieces that has really risen in this project, and a lot of other alternative analyses across the country, is really looking at ways to advance equity and ensuring that whatever is ultimately first proposed later this year, and then finally kind of agreed to on consensus, really does advance equity and ensure that it is grounded through a comprehensive conversation. While at the same time also supporting sustainable growth, but also ensuring that we focus on practical and feasible solutions. And so, the alternatives analysis is really looking at all possibilities, but that does not mean that when we present something later this year, that it's the final decision as well. So, as I mentioned, I have been working on this project for a very long time. And when we were last year, many months ago, we were just starting the project where we were developing our purpose statement, gathering all of our data, and really fleshing out both the existing and future conditions to kind of line up with the analysis. Once we had done that, we had gone through a very comprehensive screening process, looking at all the potential roadways that could possibly fit either a bus rapid transit or a light rail solution. Ran through a number of evaluation criteria, starting from approximately 250 road segments. We arrived at about 150, which is still a large number, but it gave us a lot of flexibility to kind of thinking through what made the most sense ultimately. So that's what ran through what we call a tier 1 evaluation. And that's what's really considered a high level technical analysis. So that's really looking at what roads potentially have the possible curb to curb, what are the high level environmental impacts that could occur. It involves kind of looking at a level of kind of housing and land use oriented elements as well. And through that, we have arrived, it's given us the sense of what should be presented, what we consider to, which is where we are today, which is really the in-depth analysis looking at kind of combining all the road segments that made it through the screening, connecting them to proper routes from north to south, and run them through a wide range of analyses, which I will run through in a second. Really get into the weeds of
many of the questions that have been asked, whether it's from city of Providence or from stakeholders, business community or applicants. And it's this information that we really need to a very extensive and frank conversation. And that is really what you'll see in the draft LPA going into the fall, and then following that robust conversation that we'll have involved will lead to a refinement process and ultimately to a final data that will be confirmed. Well, actually, alternatives, very clear, you're looking at 2 quarters, not one. So that being said, you guys are the first group to actually see what we are going to know. So this will actually be very much available very shortly. We are looking at 4 alternatives, 2 which are weather related and 2 which are bus traffic transit related. As you can see, there's not, in the northern part, there's really not much of a difference. I'll zoom in a second. Do that now. As you can see on the far left, you know, we're looking at, you know, essentially 2 primary roads in Central Falls. We're looking at both alternatives on both sides of the city. They'll run into Pawtucket with some slight variations. And then looking south of downtown, there are some number of things that we compared, and then ultimately the southern termini are TF Green and CCR. So that has not changed. One thing I will note, and we had a technical working group session with about 20 individuals back in April, looking at land use maps and looking at a variety of tier 1 results. And a fundamental question we asked that group was, should light rail even still be on the table? And we had given them an hour looking at all the data from tier 1 analysis, looking at land use, both the land use that could support that type of intense level of service mode rather bus. And after about 30 minutes, the 4 groups that we had assembled all said that there was a rationale to maintain it, but not for the whole. So as you see on these maps, the yellow and the blue lines, the large alternatives, stop essentially at Park Avenue, for instance. And it's not because we did not want to complete the route, it's because the land use density drops significantly. And given that the cost of a rail solution is more substantial, we want to ensure that if such an investment were to be made, that is the preferred alternatives, that it is justifiable and it's a practical solution. Now, we will also note that we are looking at a number of sub-approaches. I know there are varying opinions on some of this, and we've had some conversations with Nate and with Jessica about what that entails. And, you know, I will be frank, you know, one of the areas that we really do need to look at is how we get through downtown. That's not an unusual conversation around transit at large, and really mobility for all modes. And so, you know, we are looking at all possible ways from north to south. All of our alternatives are going through the train station. All of our alternatives are going through downtown in some form or another. And so we will be comparing all, and that does not mean that any one of these lines are the final one. It just means that we want to compare. So at the end of the day, for example, if people really do like the yellow line, the LRT line, but decide it should be bus, we will do that through a refinement process. So this is not the end. This is what we're going to be going through. And there'll be more frank discussions, and I'm more than happy to provide that. All that being said, as I said earlier, there is this tier 2 evaluation. And I thought as an opportunity to kind of lay out what that actually entails. It has a lot. And it's going to be a very intensive 2 to 3 months. Sarah and I will be going through the consultancy. That ranges from engineering, running ridership projections, running operational analysis, running cost estimates, understanding what the capital and operating extensively look like. thinking about the implementation considerations, running analyses on environmental and economic benefits, and also running an equity analysis, which I'll get into in a few minutes. It's a fairly substantial change from a lot of projects that have done. Not spend a little bit of time. And by grouping those all together, that's what we're going to arrive at these locally preferred. So, engineering wise, what do I mean by that? Right now, the consulting team is doing a curb-to-curb measurement of every single road segment that are along these assembled routes. And they are doing the planning level conceptual design of each alternative, so each bus alternative, and each rail alternative. And they are going to be laying out some roll maps. I'm seeing the first set Friday. And they should have them done in the next couple of weeks, so we can be able to start looking through intensely what they're going to start putting into the model. But the real detail on the concepts are only going to be focused on the most complicated locations. In many places, as you saw in the maps earlier, there are roadways that have substantial curve to curve. We can make some pretty substantial engineering assumptions, but there are some tight parts of this road where we do need to scrutinize. We'll obviously be able to see a Providence when it comes to the downtown segments, obviously the city of Kentucky and the city of St. Falls, their respective areas. And we will have some more detailed information shared back. Now, for those constraints that we have identified, that information will be fed into the service plan, cost estimates, and the considerations for implementation. Because if certain constraints make this project more difficult, it may require some further considerations if we move forward an option, how we would find it to mitigate and resolve those differences. Now, ridership model. As I mentioned before, major goal is obviously grow transit ridership. And the key piece that I want to share here is in order to do this modeling, the Federal Transit Administration requires us to utilize a software called STOPS, or the Simplified Trips on Project Software. This is used by every transit operator who wants to seek substantial funding through the program called the Capital Investment Grant Program. For those who may not be very familiar with travel demand models, this is, which is typically 4 stages: setting up trips, routes, injecting land use data, and so forth. This is a limited implementation. So there's some slight modifications in what would be considered a conventional model. The state planning reviews for larger travel infrastructure projects. Standard. And what this software will do is it will give us detailed transit travel patterns for both a no-build solution as if we don't do anything with the alternative, and the built scenario. And it will quantify and measure the travelers and transit dependence in particular, and provide us the changes in automotive VMT based on the changes of the overall ridership. Now, before I move on, projects of this size, you're thinking many, many years. There is a restriction on how far we can project. We can only project out 10 years. And so our base year is going to be 2025, and we'll be projecting out to 2030. And that information will be available for the rest of it. Environmental and economic benefits. Pretty straightforward, but from the economic side, we want to understand, by making this investment, what are the direct, indirect, and induced investment, whether that is, are there increased development, mixed use, are there indirect businesses, maybe see business grow, but maybe from external improvements, not just directly from the project, or induced where there is an incentive through the project that was not expected. And I think one thing that is intriguing to me is better understanding the changes in what those development opportunities look like. On the environmental side, we're looking at air quality, stormwater, possible impacts of protected areas, land use, planning consistencies. And so we have the GIS data of every community, we filtered them on top of the study areas, run them against the future existing conditions, and we'll be using that as part of the generation of this model. Now, as I wanted, and I said earlier, equity is one of the primary goals of this project. And so, we have written a pretty substantial equity framework that is guiding our decision-making process, which aligns both with our project purpose, our goals, the needs of it, and understanding what considerations for particular populations in particular neighborhoods that we need obviously. And the analysis also aligns with the long-range transportation plan's goal of strengthening communities. And so in that framework, we have worked with the consulting team and we've established a points-based rubric that each alternative will be compared against, both by the goals and by the considerations that are helpful. That will be applied towards the very end of the alternatives analysis. And in that rubric, the final interpretation is on a 18-point scale. So for any alternative that is between 15 and 18 total points, that's deemed to be highly equitable. If something is below 10 points, that alternative is deemed low equity. And that is where we will sit down with consultants, sit down with planning departments to work out what improvements need to be made to increase it to at least moderate. This is certainly not just an infrastructure level, but there's also policy conversations that play out that may involve city input, neighborhood input, but we will help facilitate these conversations. And that analysis will be available when we have those public discussions later this year. Operationally, and I think this is for Sean and for Nate, the kind of my primary context when it comes to safety and engineering. We are soon going to be running a travel time analysis, understanding, all right, if we can get, what does it take to go from end to end? What are the average speeds that are involved? And that compiles with the traffic analysis. And that is, if we look at the bottom, what we consider to be safer, something that really emulates traffic patterns and access to light intersections and so on. We will definitely be engaging with both you, Nate, and Sean to proceed through. We'll be definitely able to share the results. We will be also looking at potential stop locations and what is that access fast, first and last mile. We will also be looking at reliability systems. So this is where looking, all right, where can we gain potentially exclusive light? Where we have to be in mixed traffic, and what does that mean for the congestion system? We recognize we are not the only mode of travel on roadways. We know there are cyclists on the road, there are automobile traffic, commercial, freight goods movements. So we need to consider that in mind. And then many a question we've already received from many communities is, what are the potential problems? I am the first to acknowledge that we're not going to be able to get fixed highway everywhere, but my goal is to acquire it, or obtain it to the extent that. And so I want to be able to build that out, but also identify opportunities to improve on pedestrian and bicycle safety, accessibility as much as possible. And this forms a pretty substantial part of what gets filtered into the ultimate LPAs. Obviously, the service plan needs major modification. We need to understand it from. And implementation considerations. This is more of a kind of viewpoint of when it comes time to talk about a project. Of the alternatives that are on the table, how is it to actually construct? Because if it ends up being that whole chunk of segments are really going to be crazy to work out, maybe that alternative may not be worth it unless people are willing to make those trade-offs. What is it going to take to firm? from an engineering standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. In particular, NEPA, which, because this would be a federally supported project, there are very particular requirements that have to be met on that. And then, what is the level of jurisdictional support, whether that's at the municipal level, state level? They're not influencing ultimately the LPAs just yet, but it's important for us to gauge that early on. Just so we know as we get into public discussion, as we get into refinement, what we need to keep in. And then, as with all things, what is it gonna cost to not only build the alternative, and that's being derived from the engineering work that's being done now, and the implementation considerations. Ultimately, what does that mean for them to follow? It's a new service. If it's rail, obviously, that's a very different conversation than the bus, but we need to understand. So, all that being said, and what would be a very intensive 2.5 months, we will be having 4 locally preferred alternatives drafts to present in the fall. And you'll be able to see them side by side, so you can see the specifics of each alternative and what are the pros and the cons, and what are the trade-offs that people need to consider as they give us feedback. So you'll be seeing what weekday ridership will look like, you will see what the travel times and the reliability of that service. You will see what the potential for development looks like, the access to opportunity would look like, the environmental impacts, costs. And that's just a high level. There's a lot more that will be available to talk. And at this juncture, local officials, stakeholders, someone who we've already reached out to, and members of the public, will be able to review all this and be able to have a framework of conversation with feedback on those alternatives, both in multiple in-person and virtual sessions. And then our target, once we have received that, it's going to be probably half of that process. We will take that feedback back. We will sit down with the consulting team and identify, all right, what alternatives really got a positive response, which ones do we really want to focus our refinement dollars on, and then go back to the public in the upcoming winter and into the spring of 26, what that final local preferred alternative is for both those programs. Really assess, all right, is there support? And if there is, then that's where we would go to city council level, state planning council, and others to really adopt that. That is a critical element, because if there were to move as a project, the Federal Transit Administration very much wants to make sure that there is that level of support. And they do ask for the information. That being said, I know I threw quite a bit in concise a manner as I could, given the level of technical elements. But I'm happy to provide any further information and take any questions.
I was wondering, because just based on some of the routing choices for LRT, you had kind of it splitting up, being, you know, one way in one direction, one way in the other direction. I'm wondering if there's consideration for changing the roadway network so that some of the two-way streets become the one way, and then you can keep the LRT together.
Very, very good question. You know, we know, so we're looking at most of the alternatives on that map we saw really are bi-directional as much as possible. And obviously that's ideal really for any transit service. It's an industry best practice. But it's important for us to also understand what are the trade-offs of doing. You know, there are only so many ways to go to Providence. It's entirely important to understand all those trends. Now, people could say at the end of the day, you know what? We want bi-directional on Fountain. You know, obviously it's a one-way road today. But if people are very adamant about that, that's obviously a conversation we would have not only with the city of Providence, but also with RIDOT, given what does that mean for impacts on intersections, what does that mean for impacts on flow, if I use that example, obviously the flow through the square, what does that mean for the flow through some other pretty important intersections? And that's where the synchro analyses that we're involved in help form that conversation. And obviously, at the end of the day, if people are very adamant on a solution that doesn't involve the change of direction or bi-directionality, obviously that's a much more in-depth conversation. Sean, commission, accepting the change. So just because the line looks separate does not mean at the end of the day it's separate. It could end up being that, but that's where public feedback is important for us. But a very valid question. You're not the only one who's asked me that in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I had pulled up an example from my hometown, in Edmonton, Alberta, and they took a downtown street. It used to be one way in each direction, actually 2 lanes in each direction, but, and parking, and then now it's literally just 1 lane for vehicles, just for like deliveries, basically. They've got the light rail, and then they've got a cycle track, and it just like, that is now the like pedestrian transit street, and then the other streets in downtown serve the vehicles, so it does have a lot of benefits to kind of
Yeah.
bring that stuff together.
I will just follow by saying, you know, in some of the conversations that I've had with a couple of communities, there are situations where we may need to make some very serious conversations around flow of traffic, making one way or another. And obviously that comes with trade-offs. And that's where those frank discussions throughout this process and really as we start with finding the local alternatives, it's vitally important to understand it. Ask me anything. I'm the end.
Stunning, gotten so much, like, since last week, that I have done progress. So, but being at
That's one thing I was curious to see, I heard you like that, well, I'm curious why, like, what are the big benefits of that?
So one of the major drivers and is that when you're talking about a real solution, we're talking about a service that's really transported about 20 to 25,000 people on average. If you look at the land use throughout the region, you know, Central Falls, you know, 1 square mile, 1 square mile, the city, 22,000 people. You look at Pawtucket, there's a lot of opportunity for mixed use development in there and further conversations with the city about potential in the surrounding. And then obviously the natural levels of density, proposed future density to the comp plan really stand out in the data. And, you know, one would say, you know what? We know Cranston, we know Warren, the far more suburban. Why would we truncate it right there? That being said, there are still levels of density that could justify. And we have had some conversations with the lower cities along the corridor. And they understand why. You know, there are conversations around increasing density, obviously, in a big slide by the state, the housing department, and others to do sustainable development. Not, you know, 10-story apartment buildings, but really missing middle house, 3, 5 stories. And there is some willingness to do that, but in order for us to properly project the project, we can't make unsubstantiated assumptions. So if it's not firmly detailed and there isn't a genuine pathway in that development plan, we can say, all right, you know, these units, we can project this ridership and number of people living there we can't consider. So that's what led to that. But as you look at these maps, that doesn't preclude us from considering it in a future effort. Can I speak to when that would ever be? That is not for me to say. But the working group felt that given the data and given kind of what they've heard from communities, it made the most sense at that juncture. But like I said, we're comparing it. You know, people, when we release the results in the fall, they may be out and saying it needs to go whole. In which case we would say, all right, we'll take that feedback and we'll fine it through that process. We'll run the cost estimates again, both operationally, capital wise, go back and say, okay, that's the preferred alternative you wanted for this corridor. This is what's on the table. So there's obviously a lot of frank discussion and a lot of trade-off conversation. But we wanted to start with someone who we can at least have a conversation, because especially in the rail situation. But there's a lot of.
Is that one understanding for rail outside of capacity for.
Correct, I mean, and that's part of those trade-offs, right, it's like, you know, if there is projection longer term, you justify it. Modeling, unfortunately, you have to stick within a 10-year period, but we've teed up this process so that we're not including future changes in the process.
I'm sorry you've already covered this, I do hear you talking about like cost and budget, but I guess I'm wondering about the funding source for this, and maybe we've gone over this sometimes. But can you? refresh me on
Yeah,
that?
no, it's all good. So one of the primary sources of funding, I make this very clear, capital funding. The Federal Transit Administration has a program called the Capital Investment Grant.
Okay.
It's been around.
Because you were talking about the modeling. Almost, you're saying the modeling required for that grant.
Right, you have to run the stock model to move a project to be considered for that project. Or we would have to build our own model and run it by updated being comparable. So most agencies just decide to use that James model because it's already been predetermined, it's run through an assortment of 15 agencies of varying sizes and varying modes. So it already has a baseline of apples to apples comparison. So we don't have to go through the effort of recreating the entire thing ourselves. And so if it's that funding source in particular, we have to use stocks.
For the CIG program on average, because I know you've looked at the numbers and assuming you haven't memorized them, but like, what's sort of the range in recent years of the grants that they've given out and that cup and what are the match requirements?
Sure. So there's typically anywhere between $4 to $6 billion in this program per year. Unlike most funding programs, this is not a discretion. Where I would just simply send an application saying I want to build a bus rapid transit and I get money and I. This is a, this is a big. Can I go home? This will partially answer your question. We put it in this presentation.
So you said how many billion annually and how
Between
many
4 to 6 on it.
and they hand out each year roughly.
So there's an asterisk to this. So because it's not discretionary. Because everyone else sees all the color. Almost. Okay, there it is. So $4 to $6 billion on average. The average amount that's typically given out for projects really can vary. Highest end I've seen is about $1 billion. To any, and that's what we would consider a new starts program. Both for capacity and the whole one. And I've seen projects that have been as small as 85, which by FTA standard we consider small, small stocks. The reason this isn't a discretionary program is that FTA runs it through multiple phases. So the alternatives analysis is a major piece of this stuff. They're trying to do as much pre-project development at first phase on the top there, and even on the bottom, to really define the project and do as much engineering, as much environmental review as we possibly are into the program. And if the community and the region come together and say, we have a project that we'd like to move forward, we would then go to FTA requesting formal entry into the project development phase. Where we would continue to refine it, we would continue working on cost estimates, probably once beyond just the concept. We would be working through on matching. And that was important because in the CIG program, unlike discretionary programs where it's 80-20, this is 60-40. So if a project is $1 billion, you would get 600 million, and you would have to find it. And so what we're trying to do with our study is really hone in on what is absolutely essential in that development phase, so that we can give ourselves as much room, because we're only allowed 24 months. Because they really want to see, is the project moving forward? Before anything gets really engineered, projects go through a rating process. Using most of the things that I laid out just earlier, whether it's ridership, environmental, jurisdictional support, costs of the city. And on that scale, if projects rate at a certain level, they will be open to having a conversation on what is that dollar amount that they're willing to put themselves on. And then you would go through design, you get rated again, and then you would get to funding agreement, which is really at the discretion of the administration. It's actually a proper line item in the federal budget. It is not something that FTA on the own just says we're awarding it. They make that recommendation through USDOT. And whoever is in the executive seat at that time would decide, all right, we're going to advance the project. There are many projects already in this pipeline. I can tell you that because Salt Lake City has the Olympics in 2034, there are a number of projects that are already moving through this process. One of which already ended just about 4 months ago. There are a dozen other VRT projects that are very informed, many of which are the lower cost range, so they're all kind of in these small starts, which is accelerated. But this is why the alternative analysis is important, because it better helps us to understand what is not only the cost, but what bucket are we looking at in terms of funding. Because as we see below, small starts is a far more accelerated process, which can be good or bad depending on your project. So, you know, by this winter, when we have a final LP that we're going to get behind, I will be working with the consulting team to run an initial rating to understand, all right, if this is done, where does that fit and what conversations we still need to have to improve that. But we don't have to jump into project development or submit that request to the table. You wouldn't want to trigger it unless you know for certain you're going to. So we need another year to go through. We've got conversations that we need to work out some different details. Then we take that. So
Bottom line,
yes, as I long.
fantastic federal funding opportunity. Like there's a lot of federal funding to build this stuff. But the 40% local match is a huge, huge hurdle to clear. So, you know, that's, I think a lot of work is going to happen around that based on the state of it. And we'll see.
You have to get evidence of the 40% before we.
Ultimately, not immediately, but before that process is, you know,
Yeah, you do need the
in that
document.
last triangle.
Essentially, it's a letter of, be able to present. It's like a discretionary grant. Like the grant right now, CEO would provide a letter saying we're committing 20%, which the state would have to show, or the municipalities, whoever is part of that funding stack would have to make that commitment. We have to show them. Or negotiate with us.
And we either get it or we don't. Like, it's, you know what I mean, it's an application and they can either.
Yeah,
take
it's,
it or
like,
take
you know,
something
it's like a
else, and then-
4-year plus application process. So I think we'll have good indications along the way of how it's going, but essentially.
This is why the rating process is important, because at every stage, you know, if we get to the design and the design phase and they say, you know what, we really need you to really tackle these pieces in order to improve that rating. We will take that time to go back and do it. It's the project development step in particular that we have at time. So that's just because we want to keep projects moving. We could take 4 years in engineering if we need to get over that first hurdle. They'd have time. Because there's projects even behind ours if we were to move forward. We don't always time.
it is really, the rating process really is helpful. I've seen projects just not go forward as originally planned because they didn't score high enough on the ridership. Under the rating process, or so it's not only the funding, it's all sorts of things that can, hold a project back, but it's helpful. Did you guys?
I had a kind of a separate question, but I guess like this could also be split up into phases too, right? To like work with the funding that is available and, can be locally matched. But I was wondering if in the like evaluation and the weighting, because I think some of these options are kind of overlap with the Great Streets Plan where the urban trail network is and is supposed to go. So like the fact that an LRT on that street would essentially eliminate the bike lane, like is that part of the
So,
factoring?
this is where the conversation of trade-offs. And I think I will be very frank, there could be a lot of conversations, whether it's how do we work through differences of opinion in the city of Providence, what are the differences of opinion in Second Falls? What does that mean from a roadway standpoint? What does that mean from a land use standpoint? And that's why this effort is important, because this opens those, open the door to have those frank discussions. Better understand how a project like this fits with the longer term vision. So I will not lie, like some of these are going to be very challenging conversations to have, but it's important to have that data to have that discussion. It's important to have. So, I know there are conflicts with the Great Streets Plan, but I think the information you'll see will allow us to have.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the local communities have to really like the project, and if it doesn't support the broader, multimodal vision, not just the state or RIPTA, but each local community, then it doesn't, doesn't work. So, ultimately, it's
Just want to make sure we're balanced in that
public process,
making
right?
sure, making sure that vehicles are not, superseding everything else in terms of trade-offs.
In tier one, the consultant team actually put together a great, roughly segment by segment, like here are segments where you can achieve, dedicated transit lanes without, at the expense of no other right of way, no other user of the right of way. And then lots and lots of segments with, trade-offs to parking, biking, travel lanes. I mean, there's a lot of conflicts throughout. I mean, this is definitely not a so. And that was part of what narrowed the field of corridors to look at, but even within the narrower field, obviously, yes.
The last thing I will say, I want to make sure that there are any questions, so I don't know. You still have an item mentioned that I want to.
Oh, there's a very short one.
Oh, okay. I think one thing that our consultants have said, and it really is a true fact, is that we really do have the bone and the density for these types of services. We just have to own the roadways. And so that's what makes providing this type of service really challenging. Like I mentioned before, you have projects that are in Salt Lake City, for example. You have massive 6-lane roadways, 3 in each direction, where it's like, okay, we can take, middle lanes of the roadway and that's totally fine, right? Here it's like, oh, well, we have, 48 feet from one end to the other. What is the tree? So, and I think that makes this project unique too. It's not, it's not just a straightforward one, but I think it's important for regional discussion because there's so many underlying goals, objectives we want to achieve. And the alternatives analysis helps form the frame.
Each time you say trade-offs, I assume they're trade-offs that are fine with me. And then I realize, oh, maybe there's like actually things that I care about that would be a trade-off. But did I hear that? I'm like, oh, trade-offs for others, okay.
And that's
Usually how.
and that's why the engagement process in the fall is going to be important. Obviously, once we have dates for that and have information ready for it, we do strongly encourage people to invite as many people not just from organizations you may support, but neighborhoods that may be in the study area, business owners, major stakeholders, what have you. The more feedback we get, the more robust information we have at disposal of the refinement process. You know, the final may not satisfy everybody, but we're hoping that it will achieve the greatest consensus. So I welcome your feedback as we have data available. We are going to be opening a story map with this information and a lot of the background as to what led us to this deployment project. That should be online soon. And if you know, once it's live, if you know you have more questions or folks who share with that questions, they are more than welcome to. Or in person, you can.
Any final questions for that, was there? That was amazing. Thank you so much. And if any future info you have, I'd be helpful to share. Okay, back to the future chair of this committee. You did a great job.
Well, thank you for the vote of confidence.
Awesome, okay, for the last agenda item, can we please read item 5 into the record, please?
Update on STIP process. Jessica Lance, Department of Planning and Development, and Sean Raymond, RIDOC.
I think this is actually just a quick update on where we're at with STIP.
Yes. I don't have a presentation.
No,
I'll be real quick.
just.
So,
comments.
yep, the city of Providence is reviewing the draft grant agreement from RIDOT for the North Main Street STIP project. So we have that in hand. We are working through some maintenance questions and issues. DPW Public Properties, everyone's getting a hand in this, which is a little bit more than usual. But I think we're good. I think we've reached a good consensus. I plan to be submitting the council resolution for that for July sometime to allow us to enter into the agreement. And then at that time, we can sign the agreement. And then we'll be working on drafting up a scope of work to put an RFP out for engineering to start. And so that will start off the entire process. We don't have any conceptual designs at this point that we are considering. The start of the scope of work with whatever firm we end up going with is going to be the start of that process. And real quick, he's probably going to hate me for this. So Ryan Dickerson is a principal planner on my team. He's gonna be the project manager for the team on this project for the planning department. So I wanted to bring him so that he gets a sense of this group and who's on the committee. He'll probably have a little bit more input through the process once we get started. So that's where we are on that. There will be more soon.
Yeah. It's all happening.
It is.
And I want to try to get you the deadline for when to get stuff on our final live.
Yes.
Because we only need to break it off. So
Right. Yeah, we're trying to get things.
Yeah. I'll just see that you pull the leaves.
Okay.
What is the physical scope of
The description of the project is the design and engineering of North Main Street from the Pawtucket City line to, I think it's the Doyle intersection, because that's the RIDOT maintained area.
Doyle South.
Yeah, Doyle South is city, so it's pretty much the entire corridor.
Is anyone else trying to take a question for Jess? We've been excited for this for a while, so I'm excited to see it.
I've been asking RIDOT for this for years. At
Yay!
this point, so
Not
very exciting.
Sean.
Not Sean, no,
Just defending
Sean is not the bottleneck.
Just in terms of high level, when you think you'd be able to get a consultant on board for that scoping, think like later this year or?
I think later this year, by late fall, early winter, probably.
And I know RIDOT's going through tip provide, I think this project was looking at possible changes with where the funding lies.
So as soon as we sign the agreement, the funding is completely obligated. And then we have 3 or 4 years for completion, so it's a total of $4.5 million. That's design, engineering, and construction, all in one go.
So it's 2020.
I think it might be 29. I don't remember off the top of my head.
And then there's also that earmark.
That's included. Yeah, so there was a STIP amendment a few months ago
Oh,
that wrapped that into it. So that's the total amount, the $4.5 million for design, engineering, and construction.
We're gonna look to add safety plumbing as well. That's kind of, once we
Okay.
kind of get that where we think construction will wind up. It'll hope be planned. Or a safety plumbing program.
As
I
we
think
go
right now we're
through-
going 27, we might not be ready for that potentially, so.
We'll see. Yeah, and as we go through the design process and start getting, cost estimates, we understand there might be some phasing that we'll have to do. I don't think that $4.5 million is going to cover everything. We'll have those conversations when it's time.
That's what, yeah, like, add more, so.
Exactly.
Make sure I get there.
Maybe a possible question. Just for somebody who doesn't know sense of like what things cost at scale. I know we don't really land yet, but like what can you do with that like $1.5 million? Like,
That's what we're gonna find out. That's what the process is gonna help us find out.
so like very broad, like major design, if that's what side of that, like scope kind of
Some,
like
yeah,
moving curve lines and.
potentially. Yep, it's all on the table right now. Yeah, and also just to note, all of the work that Crypta is doing, ideally what we end up constructing would not preclude any of the work that Crypta would be doing. So we'll be taking all of that.
And again, that was part of the point of creating this task force, is to make sure that everyone does say, at this table, it's all that. It's all coming together. Awesome. I'm so excited, and I'll send, we'll talk about the deadlines. Any other final comments or questions? Awesome, okay, so then I already have the public comment list, and it's 2 names on it. Sherry Waldman had to leave, she's from the Southern Neighborhood Association. She's gonna be on our next agenda, but it's a preview, there's gonna be some cool art happening on Main Street that she wants to talk to us about, but it's in a few minutes. So, I think it's gonna be very interesting, so. Art coming our way on North Main, Sherry will have more information, she's the president of the Summit Neighborhood Association. Other is Brian. And is Brian still here? Did Brian leave? Oh, Brian was here.
I think he's better.
Oh, John walked out. You like, that was him. He like just left. Was he in the bathroom or did he speak?
No, it's home to shine.
Oh, man, I'll email him later. What's it called? Anyway, Brian, this is our last public comment, so. Any other comments for the task force? Motion to adjourn. So moved, second, all in favor?
Hi.
Okay.